I was looking at a simple laptop charger the other day, just a black brick with a cord. I flipped it over, made in China. But that's not really the story. The story is the plastic, which probably started as oil from the Middle East. The copper and the wiring, likely mined in Chile. The tiny microchips inside, designed in the US, fabricated in Taiwan, using chemicals from Japan and machinery from the Netherlands. All these pieces from all these places had to get on trucks, they're onto a ship. That ship, one of thousands, carrying 80% of everything we own, sailed through narrow channels and open oceans, all based on a global handshake. A rules-based agreement that, for decades, basically said, let the ships pass. And it worked. But what if that handshake is over? Suddenly, the narrow channel is closed for military drills. The country making the chips is now a national security risk.
Yeah.
The nation providing the raw materials is hit with a retaliatory tariff. A whole intricate, invisible system we took for granted. It's fracturing.
Yeah.
And that simple black brick, it's not just a charger anymore. It's like a map of a battlefield.
That analogy, it perfectly captures the strategic environment we're in now, and critically, how quickly that idea of supply chain efficiency has been replaced by, well, resilience, security. The world is shifting really fast from relying on that one, seamless, invisible global system to one where self-sufficiency, having backups, redundancy.
Yeah.
That's paramount now. For the big global economies, security is really driving policy these days.
Okay, so if that global handshake is failing, or at least, getting shaky, how does a major player like China, which basically built its modern economy on those old rules, becoming the world's factory, how do they manage this fracturing environment? How do you prepare for those channels closing or the tariff suddenly hitting?
That is the absolute core question for this deep dive. What we're exploring is a coordinated systemic response. It's being rolled out across multiple dimensions. We're talking economic, technological, infrastructural, and even legal strategies.
All working together.
Exactly. We're focusing on sort of the big three initiatives that really define this new approach to global engagement. First, there's the dual circulation strategy, DCS we'll call it, which is all about internal resilience. Then you've got the massive infrastructure push of the Belt and Road Initiative, the BRI, which handles external connectivity. And finally, the institutional consolidation that comes from the new law on foreign relations, the LFR. Think of it as a legal defense shield.
So our mission today is to try and understand how these three pretty powerful strategies are working together in concert. It sounds like a very deliberate effort. Reduce vulnerabilities inside, become more self-reliant. But at the same time, re-anchor, maybe even redirect those global economic flows on the outside.
That's it exactly. It's about building a system for China that is fundamentally indispensable to the world, but also structurally secure against that big risk everyone's talking about, decoupling.
Okay, let's start with the economic cornerstone then. The dual circulation strategy, DCS. This was introduced around 2020, right? And it feels like one of the biggest strategic pivots in Chinese economic thinking since the late 70s.
It really is. It's huge. The official line is something like, domestic circulation must be the mainstay, with internal and external circulations mutually reinforcing each other.
Right, okay. Sounds a bit academic, maybe.
It does, but to really get the weight of that, you have to look back at what it's replacing, what came before.
And that was the two ends outside model. That's the one that powered the massive growth during the reform and opening up period.
Precisely. Two ends outside was laser-focused on export-led growth. Pure and simple. One end was importing raw materials, components, technology from abroad. The other end was exporting the finished goods, usually low-cost stuff back then, out to global markets. That's what built those massive coastal industrial clusters, the factories of the world.
But it left the economy vulnerable, didn't it?
Extremely vulnerable to two big things. Dips in global demand if the world stopped buying, China's factories stopped humming. And maybe more importantly now, political friction. Anything that could cut off either end of that chain, imports or exports.
Okay, so dual circulation flips that script. It tries to swap out some of that foreign reliance with domestic demand and domestic production instead.
Correct. The new strategy really demands a fundamental reorientation. It's all about cultivating this massive, increasingly innovation-driven domestic economy to act as the main anchor. It means focusing activities on building up and satisfying demand at home, upgrading China's own production capacity, streamlining local supply chains. The big goal is to make reliance on the domestic market the primary engine for growth. That provides stability no matter what shocks happen externally.
So why the big shift now? Was it purely a reaction to, say, the U.S.-China trade war and all the geopolitical tension? Or were there maybe internal reasons piling up that made the old export model just unsustainable anyway?
It's really a critical mix of both internal drivers and external pressures. You can't separate them entirely. On the domestic side, that old model, heavy investment, export-focused, was hitting some real structural limits. Think about it. When China's GDP per capita crossed the $10,000 mark back in 2019.
That's a key threshold, isn't it?
It really is. It signals you're moving into that middle-income economy zone. And sustaining growth at that level historically requires a shift. You can't just keep adding more inputs, more factories, more workers. You have to get more efficient, more innovative, what economists call boosting total factor productivity, or TFP.
Right. Avoiding the famous middle income trap, where developing economies kind of stall out before they become truly advanced high-income countries.
Yeah.
So DCS sounds like a way to try and jump that trap through what they call high-quality development.
Exactly. High-quality development is the buzzword, and it means innovation-driven growth. That needs a big, sophisticated domestic market. Consumers willing and able to pay for higher-value domestic goods and services, which in turn needs other things, like social reforms, developing the central and western regions, not just the coast.
Okay, so there were internal pressures building, but the external stuff really kicked it into high gear.
Definitely. The external pressures were the immediate catalyst, the thing that forced this accelerated shift. You had the shrinking global market, a generally depressed world economy even before the pandemic hit hard, plus rising populism, protectionism everywhere, and this general anti-globalization feeling bubbling up.
And then the big one, the U.S.-China relationship souring.
Yes. Specifically, the very real perceived risk of a comprehensive economic and technological decoupling, especially with the United States. So the DCS strategy is fundamentally designed to boost self-reliance, make the economy more sustainable, more resilient, keep things stable even if there are major shocks to those global production chains. It's a strategic choice, really, aimed at reshaping China's advantages in global competition, make it less reliant on the West for certain high-tech inputs, while, importantly, still remaining a crucial, massive market for foreign firms. It's not about shutting the door completely.
This is a balancing act, then.
Yeah.
But pulling this off, shifting an economy that huge, it's not just about writing a policy memo. You mentioned it requires leveraging China's unique scale. What are those inherent advantages that make DCS even plausible?
Well, the first and most obvious one is just the sheer size of the domestic market. That's the bedrock. We're talking 1.4 billion people. And crucially, within that, a middle-income group that's already over 400 million people.
400 million. That's larger than the entire population of the U.S. and Mexico put together.
Right. Exactly. That scale provides this immense, immediate, somewhat protected demand base for domestic producers. If a Chinese company can succeed just selling within China, they've already achieved massive economies of scale. Scale that few international competitors can easily match.
That's the internal gravity, the pull.
That's the demand side pull. Then on the supply side, you've got other advantages. China still has a relatively high domestic savings rate, which helps fund investment. It possesses a vast and remarkably complete industrial system, probably the world's most comprehensive manufacturing base. Everything from low-tech to increasingly high-tech. And don't forget the incredible build-out of infrastructure ports, high-speed rail, power grids. That's the foundation. These conditions are really the prerequisites that make a strategy like DCS viable.
Okay, but you can't just flick a switch from an investment-export model to a consumption-led one. That's notoriously difficult, isn't it? How do they actually plan to boost domestic consumption? What are the policy levers they can pull?
That's the really hard part. And probably where DCS implementation faces its biggest challenges. It requires some pretty significant shifts in things like wealth distribution, strengthening the social safety net. Key policies involve things like urbanization reform, specifically the hukou system, that household registration system that determines where citizens can access social services like healthcare, education.
Right, the difference between having an urban or rural hukou.
Exactly. By granting more urban hukou status to the hundreds of millions of migrant workers who've moved to the cities, you potentially stabilize their income, give them better access to services. That encourages them to spend more, rather than saving excessively for fear of future costs, like medical bills or kids' schooling.
So it's a complex socioeconomic rebalancing act, really. Make average citizens feel secure enough to actually spend more of their income. Shifting resources maybe away from just supporting producers and state-owned enterprises towards supporting households more directly.
That's the theory and the long-term goal. How effectively it's happening is another question. And woven tightly into all of this economic strategy is the national security element. You can't ignore that. DCS places a huge emphasis on technological self-reliance, mastering key technologies. This isn't just about making better consumer goods, it's about foundational technologies, core components.
Things that could be cut off by sanctions or export controls.
Precisely, which requires massive state investment in science and technology S&T, especially in basic research, original innovation, things that take a long time to pay off but reduce vulnerability in those critical sectors. Think semiconductors, advanced materials, aerospace, biotech.
It really sounds like the economic equivalent of building a massive firewall around the most critical parts of the supply chain.
It's a pretty good way to think about it, yeah. It's fundamentally a national security imperative, but it's wrapped up in economic policy language. The aim is clear. Strengthen those key production and supply chains, advance China's position in the global tech race, and ensure stability against any targeted foreign restrictions.
Okay, so if DCS is the overarching strategic concept, the big picture,
Yeah.
then the engine driving the technological side of that, building that domestic capability, that seems to be Made in China 2025 or MIC 25.
Yes, absolutely. MIC 25 is really the key implementation mechanism for building that domestic technological anchor we talked about. Now, the official name, Made in China 2025, was kind of toned down after 2018. It caused quite a stir internationally, a lot of scrutiny.
A bit too explicit, maybe.
Perhaps. But the whole ambition behind it, transforming China into a global leader in advanced manufacturing, that hasn't gone away at all. It's just continued, maybe more quietly, under broader banners like high-quality growth or innovation-driven development. The goals remain.
So let's remind ourselves, this was launched back in 2015. What were those really aggressive targets, the hard goals they set out?
Well, the headline goal, the one that connects directly back to DCS and self-reliance, was achieving 70% self-sufficiency in core components and key materials across 10 strategic sectors by 2025.
70%. That's incredibly ambitious.
Hugely ambitious. And the longer-term vision, looking out to 2049, the PRC's centenary, is to be right at the forefront of global manufacturing, a true peer or even leader across the board. Now, achieving that kind of leap requires state support on a scale that, frankly, makes most Western industrial policies look pretty modest in comparison.
Let's talk about that financial firepower, the sheer scale of state support used to drive this industrial transformation, because the numbers I've seen are just staggering.
They really are. Some independent research estimates that China's industrial policy spending averages around 4.5% of firm revenues in the sectors covered by these policies.
4.5% of revenue. How does that compare internationally?
Well, the average for OECD countries, the developed economies, is about 0.69%.
0.69 versus 4.5, that's what, 6 or 7 times higher?
It's a monumental difference in the direct financial impact of state funding on companies in those targeted sectors.
And this money wasn't just like simple handouts or grants, was it? They developed some pretty sophisticated ways to channel this support.
Absolutely. While there are some direct subsidies, a huge amount of the support flowed through more indirect, often less visible mechanisms, and these surged. Take tax benefits aimed specifically at fostering innovation. Things like allowing companies to deduct a larger percentage of their R&D expenses from their taxes.
Super deductions, they call them sometimes.
Exactly. Those super deductions for R&D costs, they increased at an average annual rate of nearly 29% between 2018 and 2022 alone. We're talking about the proportion of companies claiming these R&D tax breaks basically quadrupling between 2015 and 2023. That allows firms to reinvest huge amounts of their own revenue very quickly into scaling up R&D and expanding production.
And then there's the capital acceleration side, the direct state investment, particularly through those government guidance funds, the GGFs. Tell us about those.
Ah, yes, the GGFs. They are absolutely crucial to understanding how this works. These are essentially state-backed investment funds. They channel government money and often leverage private capital too directly into strategic priority areas. They often operate a bit outside the traditional banking system and standard market return expectations. After MIC25 launched in 2015, the total value of assets managed by these GGFs just exploded. It increased something like fivefold between 2015 and 2020.
Wow, and they target specific industries with huge sums, right?
Very targeted, and yes, massive sums. For example, they launched a dedicated national fund, the big fund, specifically for integrated circuits, semiconductors. That one alone was capitalized initially around $20 billion. Then a second phase added even more, reportedly aiming for over $47 billion. There was another big GGF announced targeting artificial intelligence, aiming for something like $8.2 billion by 2025. This is a politically driven financial system. It pushes vast amounts of credit and investment into the prioritized sectors, enabling incredibly rapid scaling, often much faster and with less concern for immediate profit or return on investment than purely market-driven competitors could ever manage.
Okay, but wait. If the state is just pumping huge amounts of credit into these chosen sectors, letting them scale up without the usual market discipline of needing to turn a profit, doesn't that inevitably lead to enormous waste? Misallocation of capital, creating zombie firms that only survive because of subsidies, masking deep inefficiencies?
That is the absolute core tension, the most profound structural conflict embedded right inside this whole strategy. And yes, the data largely bears out your concern. There's no question that industrial competitiveness surged dramatically in many of the targeted sectors. Real successes were achieved. But at the same time, these very policies generated, well, profound waste and significant structural imbalances in the broader economy. That measure of efficiency we talked about, total factor productivity, growth in TFP has largely stagnated in China over the last decade or so, and overall economic growth, while still respectable, has noticeably slowed down compared to the boom years.
So it looks like China is consciously making a strategic trade-off here. They're willing to absorb very high internal costs, rising debt, industrial overcapacity, lower overall efficiency in exchange for securing that strategic technological leadership and self-reliance in critical areas.
That seems to be the clear conclusion from the evidence. It's a long-term strategic bet. There is a systemic bias built into the system favoring producers, especially state-linked producers in strategic sectors, over consumers and households. And one major consequence of that is massive industrial overcapacity in many areas, steel, cement historically, but now also things like automotives, electric vehicle batteries, even some types of legacy semiconductors.
And where does all that excess capacity go?
It gets exported, which is why you see China's trade surplus expanding rapidly again recently. And that, in turn, fuels intensifying trade friction with partners around the world who see their own industries getting swamped by low-cost, often state-supported Chinese goods. So, yes, it seems national security and technological dominance are being prioritized, even at the cost of some short to medium-term economic efficiency and rising international tensions.
Okay, let's dig into the results of MIC25 then. Objective 1 was decreasing reliance on imports, right? Building that self-sufficiency. How effective was that core strategy of localization pressure, using market access as leverage?
It was highly effective, particularly in sectors where China's domestic market is just too big for foreign companies to ignore. The basic playbook was, if you want to sell your advanced products here, you need to build them here. And increasingly, you need to do your R&D here too. This was often enforced through things like market access restrictions for imports or procurement discrimination, government buyers favoring domestic suppliers.
Can you give us some concrete examples, hard numbers, on where import dependency really dropped?
Sure. Let's look at transport and heavy industry, which were early focuses. Take rail bogies, those undercarriage structures for trains. Imports were around $70 million back in 2015. By 2023, just $1.4 million basically eliminated.
Wow.
Or look at power generation equipment for major nuclear power plant components or ultra-supercritical coal power equipment. Domestic production now accounts for well over 90%, almost complete substitution.
And you mentioned this localization pressure even got written into formal regulations.
Yes, it became more explicit over time. A key example often cited is the 2021 document 551 related to medical devices. It reportedly mandated that public hospitals progressively increase the percentage of their annual purchases sourced from domestically manufactured medical equipment, setting specific targets.
So telling hospitals, you must buy local.
Essentially, yes, and the market data reflects the impact. Imports of certain key medical devices as a share of the total Chinese market size fell from around 24% in 2015 down to 14% by 2023. Look at high-value items like CT scanners. Imports dropped by 45% just between 2021 and 2023. That's entirely consistent with the big foreign medtech firms GE, Siemens, Philips, significantly increasing their local manufacturing and even R&D presence within China to maintain their market share. They had to localize to compete.
Okay, but now let's get to that interesting paradox you hinted at earlier. While they're reducing reliance on finished imported goods, the very act of upgrading their own industry actually increases demand for certain very specialized foreign inputs.
This is a really critical nuance to understand. It's not a simple story of just replacing everything foreign. As China localized production of many high-volume, maybe intermediate-level goods, its own push towards the technological frontier created this huge new demand for the absolute cutting-edge, highly specialized foreign components and, crucially, the manufacturing equipment needed to make advanced products. Things China still cannot produce itself at the highest level.
Right, so Chinese companies are building loads more advanced semiconductor fabs to meet domestic demand.
They need more of the world's most advanced lithography machines, which primarily come from ASML in the Netherlands. They need more sophisticated etching and deposition tools, often from US or Japanese firms, and the numbers show this clearly. Imports of semiconductor manufacturing equipment into China have more than tripled since 2015. Imports of things like high-end electron microscopes, vital for R&D, quadrupled in the same period. So even as overall import reliance on many finished products goes down, new dependencies emerge, focused on those ultra-high-tech, specialized inputs where foreign firms still hold the most advanced IP and expertise. It's a shifting dependency, not necessarily a disappearing one.
Fascinating. Okay, let's shift to the other big goals of MIC25. Boosting Chinese firms' global market share and overall competitiveness. Objective 2 and 3, effectively. Where did they really succeed in creating genuine, globally leading Chinese companies? What were the conditions for success?
They tended to thrive most spectacularly in industries that had a specific combination of characteristics. First, high capital intensity. Industries that require huge upfront investment to build factories and scale up. That's where state-directed financing provides a massive advantage over market-funded competitors. Second, a large state-supported domestic market. This provides a protected proving ground and allows companies to achieve scale rapidly before competing globally. And third, often these were industries based on relatively new technologies where there weren't already deeply entrenched global incumbents from the US, Europe, or Japan holding all the cards.
Electric vehicles and batteries feel like the absolute poster child for this model.
Indisputably. It's the classic case study. Chinese EV makers like BYD and others accounted for something like 58% of the global market share by early 2024. That's stunning dominance.
58% globally.
And it's not just assembling cars. Look at the battery supply chain, which is critical. Chinese players dominate something like 85% of global battery cell production capacity. And they lead in processing key raw materials like lithium, cobalt, graphite. They control huge chunks of the entire value chain. This leadership position wasn't accidental. It's the direct result of years, over a decade really, of sustained strategic state support subsidies, procurement mandates, infrastructure build-out. It wasn't just pure market forces at play, and this capability ensures China remains absolutely indispensable in the global automotive supply chain, even as geopolitical winds shift. Everyone needs their batteries or the materials to make them.
Okay, EVs and batteries are the big one. Where else did this concerted MIC25 push lead to global leadership or near leadership for Chinese firms?
There are several other notable advanced manufacturing fields. Optical communication equipment is a key one. Think 5G infrastructure. Companies like Huawei and ZTE became global giants despite the geopolitical headwinds they've faced. High-tech shipbuilding is another success story. Chinese shipyards used to focus on simpler vessels like bulk carriers. Now they're competing head-on in complex, high-value ships. Take LNG carriers, those specialized ships for transporting liquefied natural gas. China's share of global orders surged past 30% by 2024, challenging the traditional dominance of South Korean yards. And of course, you have to mention drones or unmanned aerial systems. DJI is the obvious example in the consumer space, but China is a global leader across almost all categories, commercial and industrial drones too.
So undeniable successes in key strategic sectors. But despite this huge technological leap forward, where do the significant vulnerabilities, the gaps, still remain? Where is China still heavily reliant on foreign tech and maybe projected to be out of reach for, say, the next 5 years or even longer?
The gaps persist primarily in the most complex, science-intensive, high-end technologies that require decades of accumulated know-how and incredibly sophisticated ecosystems. Advanced semiconductors are the most obvious example, especially producing chips at the cutting-edge nodes 5 nanometers, 3 nanometers, and below. China is investing massively, but still relies heavily on foreign equipment, materials, and some design expertise. High-end CNC machine tools. These are the ultra-precise machines needed for advanced manufacturing across many industries, from aerospace to medical devices. Domestic Chinese makers still only have about a 15% share of their own high-end market. The rest is imported, mainly from Japan and Germany.
And aerospace often comes up as a key example of continued dependence, doesn't it?
It does, because it encapsulates the challenge of integrating multiple complex systems. Look at the C-91 airliner. It's rightly hailed as a major achievement for China's domestic aviation industry. But its engines, the EE engines, are currently sourced from CFM International, which is a joint venture between GE of the US and Safran of France. It illustrates that persistent dependence on foreign technology for the most complex, safety-critical systems like jet engines. Now, foreign industry experts generally expect Chinese competitors to catch up and reach parity in many of these sectors within, say, 5 to 10 years. But for the absolute state-of-the-art, things like cutting-edge semiconductor manufacturing or next-generation jet engine technology, the consensus seems to be that true parity there is likely still out of reach until at least 2030, maybe longer, reflecting both the immense technical difficulty and the impact of existing Western export controls designed to slow progress in those specific areas.
Okay, that paints a really detailed picture of the internal economic and technological strategy the DCS and MIC25 trying to build that resilient domestic anchor. Now let's shift focus outwards. If DCS is about internal resilience, the Belt and Road Initiative, the BRI, seems to be about reshaping the external connections.
Exactly. If DCS and MIC25 build the strong home base, the BRI, which was actually launched earlier, back in 2013, provides the resilient external corridors. These are the pathways needed for China to remain deeply connected to the rest of the world and arguably make itself even more indispensable globally. BRI is fundamentally a massive infrastructure and economic development strategy. It now spans over 150 countries across Asia, Europe, Africa, Latin America. It's truly global in scope.
It really feels like the physical manifestation of China trying to reshape global interdependence on its own terms, building redundancy into supply chains, creating alternative routes that maybe bypass or supplement those traditional maritime choke points that could be vulnerable to disruption or political risk.
That's absolutely the strategic heart of the BRI, especially the belt part. It officially comprises 2 main components: the land-based Silk Road Economic Belt, which focuses on railways, highways, pipelines, and digital infrastructure across Eurasia. And then there's the sea-based 21st century Maritime Silk Road, which involves developing strategic ports, shipping lanes, and related infrastructure.
Let's focus on the land part first, specifically the China-Europe freight train network. That seems to be one of the most tangible operational success stories of the BRI so far.
Yeah.
Just how significant has this rail link become for actual global logistics?
It has been a genuine game changer, particularly for certain types of goods and supply chains. Before these rail lines were upgraded and streamlined under the BRI umbrella, shipping cargo overland between China and Europe was slow, fragmented, and expensive. Most high-value goods went by sea, and sea freight could take, 40, 50 days, maybe even longer depending on the route and port congestion.
Right.
The China-Europe Express Rail Network slashed that transit time dramatically. We're now talking average journey times of just 12 to 20 days, depending on the specific origin and destination cities. That radical reduction in lead time completely changes the calculation for supply chain managers.
12 to 20 days versus 40 to 50? That makes rail a really serious competitor. Much faster than sea, and still significantly cheaper than air freight, right? It essentially creates a whole new middle option, opening up new possibilities for resilient supply chain networks.
Precisely. It creates this valuable middle ground. It's ideal for goods that are time-sensitive, but maybe not quite urgent or high-value enough to justify the very high cost of air freight. We see specific routes flourishing. Chongqing in Western China to Duisburg in Germany, often quoted as taking 12 to 16 days. Xi'an, another major hub, to Madrid in Spain, maybe 18 to 21 days. This is perfect for things like high-value electronics, automotive components, fashion goods, and especially e-commerce shipments where customers expect faster delivery than sea mail. And by providing this efficient alternative, it reinforces China's indispensable role as the origin point for so many of these manufactured goods. It actively supports the external circulation part of the dual circulation strategy by ensuring goods can flow out efficiently.
And the BRI infrastructure investment isn't just about the long-haul rail lines themselves, is it? It also emphasizes integrating different modes of transport.
Absolutely not. It's not just point-to-point rail. The strategy is all about creating seamless multimodal transport solutions. Integration is key. For example, cargo arriving via the China-Europe rail network at major European inland hubs like Duisburg or Hamburg is often then transshipped onto trucks, barges, or even feeder ships to reach final destinations across Europe, or maybe even onward to the UK or across the Atlantic to North America. It's about optimizing the whole journey, using a combination of rail, sea, and road transport to get the best balance of speed, cost, and reliability. The BRI really acts as a trade facilitator by knitting these different modes together more effectively.
Okay, and then there's the maritime part of BRI, the 21st Century Maritime Silk Road. The strategic port investments there seem crucial for strengthening that sea corridor component.
Yes, the ports are the critical nodes on the maritime routes. China, often through its state-owned enterprises, has made significant investments in developing, managing, or operating terminals in key strategic ports around the world. Think of Piraeus Port in Greece, which became a major gateway for Chinese goods into southern and eastern Europe. Gwadar Port in Pakistan, offering access to the Arabian Sea and the Middle East, bypassing the Malacca Strait. Colombo in Sri Lanka, a vital transshipment hub in the Indian Ocean. By modernizing and efficiently managing these hubs, China enhances sea road connectivity, improves trade flows across Asia, the Middle East, and Europe, and arguably helps to re-anchor global maritime trade flows towards routes and hubs where it has significant influence and investment.
Now, we can't discuss the BRI without acknowledging the geopolitical interpretations and implications. It's often been viewed, particularly by Western observers, maybe sometimes critically, as more than just infrastructure. Is a vehicle for expanding China's geopolitical influence, reshaping the rules of the international order.
That interpretation is definitely widespread, yes. It's often seen as a projection of China's soft power, using economic leverage and infrastructure diplomacy to build relationships, secure resources, and ultimately shift the geopolitical center of gravity eastward. Debt trap diplomacy accusations have also been part of this critical narrative, although the extent and intent are debated.
Right. The debt trap concern.
However, it's important to note how China itself consistently frames the BRI. The official narrative is always about win-win cooperation, mutual benefit, shared development. The emphasis is on how infrastructure development and increased economic connectivity can foster prosperity and regional stability along these new trade corridors. From China's perspective, strengthening these economic ties and ensuring global trade continues to flow smoothly, ideally through corridors where it has some stake, is essential for its own continued development and global standing. It's presented as a contribution to global public goods.
Has this massive proactive infrastructure pushed by China prompted competitive responses from other major powers? You mentioned US and EU initiatives earlier.
Oh, absolutely. The scale and ambition of the BRI effectively forced other major global players to react and formulate their own alternative offerings. The U.S., particularly under the previous administration, but continuing now, promoted the Blue Dot Network, or BDN. BDN isn't about funding projects directly like BRI, but about certifying infrastructure projects that meet certain high standards: transparency, sustainability, financial viability. It's implicitly positioned as the quality alternative to BRI.
A standard-setting approach.
Exactly. Yeah. Similarly, the European Union launched its own global gateway connectivity strategy, again, emphasizing values, high standards, transparency, and sustainability in infrastructure investment, trying to offer partner countries an alternative model to China's.
And India, sitting right in the middle of many BRI areas, has its own concerns and initiatives, right? Concerns about sovereignty and strategic encirclement.
Precisely. India has been quite wary of BRI projects, particularly the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, CPEC, which runs through territory India claims. As a response, India has been promoting its own connectivity initiatives, like reactivating the International North-South Transport Corridor, INSTC, connecting India to Russia via Iran and Central Asia, or collaborating with Japan on projects in Africa and Southeast Asia. All these responses, whether from the US, EU, or India, really demonstrate that China's BRI has successfully reshaped the global strategic landscape. Its sheer scale forced everyone else to up their game and think much more strategically about infrastructure, connectivity, and development finance. It created a new competitive dynamic.
Okay, so we've covered the internal economic resilience strategy with DCS and MIC25. We've looked at the external infrastructure and connectivity push with the BRI. That brings us to the third pillar you mentioned, the legal and institutional framework, specifically the new law on foreign relations, the LFR, enacted in June 2023.
Yes, the LFR. This is the crucial piece that provides the legal foundation, the institutional backing for China's more assertive global posture in this new era.
It really feels like a significant moment, doesn't it? A formal break from that decades-long strategy often summed up as Tao Guangyang Hui, hide your capabilities and bide your time.
It absolutely marks a decisive shift from that Deng Xiaoping era maxim.
Sure.
The LFR is the very first comprehensive legal framework China has ever had, specifically governing its external relations across the board, political, economic, legal, security, cultural exchanges, everything. It essentially institutionalizes China's now undeniable status as a major global power. It signals a move towards a more proactive, structured, and legally grounded global presence. Though, importantly, it still maintains the official discourse of peaceful development and win-win cooperation.
So what are the core principles actually codified in this new law? What's the main message it's sending legally to the international community?
Well, the preamble and early articles lay it out pretty clearly. There is a very strong emphasis right up front on safeguarding national sovereignty, protecting national security, upholding national dignity, and defending the development interests of the country and the Chinese people.
A strong defensive posture.
Yes, the defensive framing is prominent. But immediately following those objectives is a stated commitment to world peace, global development, and upholding the international order based on the UN Charter. So it frames China's assertiveness as necessary for defending its legitimate core interests, perhaps in what it perceives as an increasingly challenging or hostile external environment, while simultaneously stating its aim to help shape a more just, equitable, and cooperative international order. An order based on China's long-standing 5 principles of peaceful coexistence.
Can you quickly remind us what those 5 principles are? They come up a lot in Chinese foreign policy statements.
Sure. They date back to the 1950s, originally agreed with India. They are mutual respect for sovereignty and territorial integrity, mutual non-aggression, mutual non-interference in each other's internal affairs, equality and mutual benefit, and peaceful coexistence. The LFR formally enshrines these principles as the bedrock of China's foreign relations. It's asserting China's vision for global governance, one that emphasizes national autonomy and non-interference, perhaps more strongly than the current Western-led liberal international order tends to.
And the law also explicitly mentions and codifies some of those major foreign policy initiatives we've already discussed, right? It integrates them into the formal legal structure.
Yes. That's another key function. It legally elevates and integrates major ongoing foreign policy initiatives. Things like the Belt and Road Initiative, the newer Global Development Initiative, GDI, the Global Security Initiative, GSI, and the Global Civilization Initiative, GCI. These are all explicitly mentioned and supported in the law. This means they are no longer just policy pronouncements or political directives from the leadership. They become legally mandated national objectives. It aligns domestic law much more tightly with China's evolving global ambitions and activities.
Okay, let's hone in on what seems like the most talked about, maybe most assertive provision in the LFR. The explicit power granted to the state to impose countermeasures. This is the legal shield aspect you mentioned.
Yes, this is arguably the most significant new element, and it ties directly back to that geopolitical friction and the risk of decoupling we discussed earlier. Article 33 of the LFR grants the state the explicit authority to adopt countermeasures and restrictive measures against any foreign acts or activities that are deemed to violate international law and norms, or that endanger China's sovereignty, security, or development interests.
Okay, countermeasures and restrictive measures. How does this new broad authority in the LFR relate to other, more specific retaliatory legal tools China had already put in place, like the Anti-Foreign Sanctions Law, the AFSL, from 2021?
That's a great question. Think of the LFR as providing the high-level foundational strategic framework. It sets the overall legal basis and authority for countermeasures. The Anti-Foreign Sanctions Law, AFSL, along with other measures like the Unreliable Entity List, are the more specific operational tools designed for immediate implementation. The AFSL was passed in 2021 specifically to provide a direct legal basis for China to retaliate against foreign individuals and entities involved in formulating or implementing sanctions against China that Beijing deems illegal or unjustified. The LFR now provides a broader umbrella. It potentially allows for countermeasures beyond just sanctions retaliation, possibly covering restrictive actions in wider diplomatic, commercial, or legal domains in response to a broader range of perceived hostile actions.
So why was enacting this explicit legal authority for countermeasures seen as so necessary right now? What gap does it fill?
It really closes what was seen, from Beijing's perspective, as a historical gap or asymmetry. Before 2021, China didn't really have a clear, foundational, proactive legal framework specifically designed to counter unilateral sanctions or other restrictive measures imposed by, say, the US or EU. Responses tended to be more ad hoc, political, or administrative. The LFR, building on the AFSL, equips the state with what it sees as necessary and legitimate legal tools for strategic defense and deterrence in the international arena. It sends a clear signal. If you take actions deemed harmful to China's core interests, China now has an institutionalized legal mechanism to respond in kind. It aims to shift the dynamic from purely political or economic responses towards legal ones as well.
And what about the reach of this law? You mentioned it includes an extraterritorial scope. What does that actually mean in practice, especially for foreign businesses or individuals?
Yes, the LFR, like the AFSL before it, asserts extraterritorial jurisdiction. This means the law claims authority not just over actions happening within China's borders, but also potentially over actions taken by entities or individuals outside of China, if those actions are deemed to harm China's national sovereignty, security, or development interests.
Okay, that sounds like it could create some significant legal complexity and risk for multinational corporations or even individuals.
It certainly does. It raises the stakes considerably. Hypothetically, if, say, a company based in Europe implements sanctions mandated by the EU against a Chinese entity, under this law, that European company or even its executives could potentially face countermeasures from China. These could range from being denied visas to enter China, having assets in China frozen, facing fines, or being placed on restrictive lists like the unreliable entity list.
Even if their actions were perfectly legal in their home country.
Potentially, yes, if China deems those actions harmful to its interests under its own law. This extraterritorial assertion reflects a much more confident, assertive legal posture in international affairs. It signals China's increasing willingness to deploy its own legal system proactively to protect its interests globally, and it definitely increases the compliance burden and the geopolitical risk calculation for any foreign entity with significant ties to China.
So, stepping back, this law seems fundamentally about enhancing China's capacity to engage in what some call lawfare, using legal instruments as tools of statecraft on the international stage.
That's one way to interpret it, yes. It certainly ensures much greater coordination between China's domestic legal development and its engagement with the international legal order. It supports the broader, long-term strategic vision of modernizing China's entire system of governance, including its foreign relations toolkit. It's about aligning the legal frameworks with China's evolving global power and ambitions, all under that overarching ideological framework of socialism with Chinese characteristics for a new era. It demonstrates a clear shift towards institutionalizing China's global power projection, using law as a strategic tool alongside the economic might of DCSMIC 25 and the infrastructural reach of the BRI.
Okay, let's try to bring these threads together then. We've looked at the internal anchor, the external corridors, and the legal shield.
What we've really tracked here is a powerful, integrated strategic transition unfolding. China appears to be moving decisively away from relying solely on that old, assumed-to-be open, Western rules-based global system, and instead building this comprehensive defense and outreach mechanism, one designed for resilience, for thriving in a much more multipolar, friction-filled, uncertain world.
Right. So the dual circulation strategy, powered by the industrial upgrading drive of MIC 25, provides that necessary internal anchor. Even acknowledging the internal costs we discussed, the potential for overcapacity, the inefficiencies from massive state support this strategy, aims to deliver fundamental self-sufficiency and even technological leadership in key sectors, like we saw with EVs and high-tech ships. That huge domestic scale is intended to make China fundamentally secure against the worst risks of external pressure or decoupling attempts.
Correct. DCS provides that protective economic layer, using the immense domestic market as a stabilizer and a source of demand. Then, the Belt and Road Initiative provides the outward-facing mechanisms, the resilient physical corridors like that China-Europe rail network, and the broader global diplomatic and economic ties needed to maintain and even expand China's global connectivity. It actively reinforces China's indispensable role in global supply chains by offering robust, often faster, logistical alternatives, many anchored in Chinese infrastructure.
And finally, the law on foreign relations provides the legal armor plating around this whole structure.
Exactly. The LFR ensures that China feels it has the necessary legal framework, the explicit authority to impose countermeasures, the assertion of extraterritorial reach to protect its sovereignty and development interests on the global stage. It's about proactively shaping the international legal and political environment to better support China's global ambitions and defend against perceived challenges.
It really is a remarkable synthesis of different levers of state power economic policy, focused on self-reliance, massive infrastructure building for connectivity, and assertive legal institutionalization, all working together towards a common set of strategic goals. Although we have to acknowledge those inherent policy frictions you mentioned, right? For instance, the domestic goal within DCS of boosting household consumption seems to sometimes conflict with a strong bias in MIC 25 towards supporting producers and investment.
That tension absolutely exists. It's perhaps the core internal challenge or potential instability within the system. How to rebalance effectively towards consumption while still pursuing state-led technological advancement. But from the overarching strategic perspective, resilience and technological leadership might be overriding concerns about short-term economic efficiency or resolving those internal contradictions quickly. What China is demonstrating here is a very determined long-term strategic vision where economic power, physical infrastructure, and legal governance are being tightly interwoven. The ultimate objective seems quite clear: to secure China's position as a powerful, globally influential nation that is indispensable to the world economy, yet structurally secure against the major risks of fragmentation and decoupling. This integrated strategy is how that old global handshake is being fundamentally reshaped, perhaps into a new system increasingly anchored by China's own influence and its own set of rules.